Imagine you were standing on the edge of a massive, steamy swamp. 60 million years ago, this wasn't Florida. This was Sarajón, Colombia. The air is thick, humid, pushing 90 degrees Fahrenheit, maybe even 95. The mud smells of sulfur and fermenting ferns. You hear a sound, not a hiss, but a low subterranean grinding like two trees scraping together. You look down at the ground near your feet. The water is churning almost imperceptibly, and a ripple, not from wind, but from something huge moving just below the surface, is heading your way. If you're a dino normie, you might be thinking, oh, maybe it's an alligator. Wrong. You're about to meet the creature that makes the largest modern python look like a timid little short king. You are about to meet the Titanoboa sarajonensis, the largest snake to ever exist, and perhaps the ultimate expression of biological terror after the dinosaurs checked out. This isn't just a big snake. This is 50 feet of muscle, 2,500 pounds of pure evolutionary flex. A sentient freight train designed by nature to be pure nightmare fuel. This absolute unit didn't just live in the swamp. It was the swamp. And today, we're diving deep into the sweltering, post-apocalyptic world it dominated. The existence of Titanoboa breaks your brain, because everything you thought you knew about snakes is fundamentally wrong when you look at the stats of this beast. How do you get a snake that weighs as much as a Honda Civic? The answer lies in the catastrophic event that paved the way for it, the KPG extinction, which wiped out the non-avian dinosaurs, leaving a power vacuum and a planet running a high fever. 60 million years ago, give or take a few millennia, the world was barely recovering from the asteroid impact that hit Chicxulub. We were transitioning from the Cretaceous into the Paleogene period, specifically the Paleocene epoch. For about 10 million years after the major extinction event, mammals were still generally small, squirrel-sized or maybe badger-sized. They hadn't hit their stride yet, but something else was thriving: ectotherms, animals that rely on external heat sources to regulate their body temperature. Think modern lizards, turtles, and, yes, snakes. The planet at this time was a greenhouse. We are talking about extreme global warming, far beyond anything modern climate models predict for our future, though the underlying mechanisms were different. Researchers from the University of Florida and the Smithsonian Tropical Research Institute, who originally studied the Titanoboa fossil finds, calculated based on leaf morphology and isotopic ratios, specifically oxygen-18 in ancient carbonates, that the average annual temperature in the equatorial region of Sarajón, Colombia, where Titanoboa lived, was likely between 86 degrees Fahrenheit and 93 degrees Fahrenheit. Why is this high temperature crucial? Because snakes are ectotherms. The warmer the environment, the faster their metabolism can run, and the larger they can grow, purely based on biological constraints related to thermal efficiency. If you take a modern boa constrictor and put it in the Arctic, it freezes and dies quickly. If you put it in a perpetually warm, high-humidity environment with unlimited food, it gets bigger. Titanoboa represents the extreme end of this biological principle. A 2012 study published in Nature suggested that to support a cold-blooded animal weighing over a ton, the ambient temperature couldn't fluctuate much below 86 degrees F. If the climate had been colder, the snake simply couldn't have maintained the metabolic mass required to be an absolute unit. It would have spent all its time lethargically trying to warm up, not hunting giant turtles. The story of the discovery is as bizarre as the snake itself. The place where we found the definitive evidence of this giant nope rope isn't a pristine archaeological dig site. It's the Sarajón coal mine in northern Colombia, one of the largest open-pit coal operations in the world. In the mid-2000s, paleontologists were invited to check out the fossil finds being accidentally uncovered during the intense coal extraction process. Coal, as you might know, is essentially highly compressed, ancient plant matter. The sheer volume of plant fossils suggested that 60 million years ago, this area was a vast, tropical, freshwater wetland, a perfect habitat. But mixed in with the fossilized ferns and palm leaves were bones, lots of bones, giant turtle shells, we'll get to those later, huge crocodile relatives, and then the vertebrae. In 2007, a team led by Jonathan Bloch and Carlos Jaramillo started recognizing that these vertebrae were unlike anything they had ever seen. They were massive, thick, and possessed distinct anatomical features common only to boid snakes, the family that includes modern boas and anacondas. Imagine holding a vertebra the size of a dinner plate. A vertebra from a modern green anaconda, The current record holder for world's heaviest snake is roughly the size of a quarter. The Titanoboa vertebrae were 5 to 10 times larger. They were so robust they looked less like bone and more like the chassis of a small truck. The researchers painstakingly analyzed 28 individual vertebrae from multiple snakes. Using the established relationship between vertebral size and body length, chow mass in extant living snakes, they scaled up the measurements. The result? A snake measuring an estimated 42 to 50 feet long and weighing between 1,135 and 2,500 pounds. Let's put that into perspective for our Dino Normie friends. The longest snake reliably recorded today is the reticulated python, maybe stretching to 25 feet, half the length of Titanoboa. If a 25-foot python is a terrifying encounter, a 50-foot Titanoboa is an existential threat. This thing was longer than a school bus and thick enough that the widest part of its body would have been roughly 3 feet across. If it were cruising down the interstate, it wouldn't fit in one lane. It would be certified roadkill, simply because it was too wide for the road. This creature wasn't just big. It was structurally dense, meaning the sheer force it could exert was astronomical. One of the common misconceptions about prehistoric predators is that they must have been highly venomous to kill such large prey. This is where Titanoboa subverts expectations. Like its modern descendants, the boas and anacondas, Titanoboa was almost certainly a constrictor. It didn't need venom. Venom is for finesse. Titanoboa was built for brute force. A constrictor's power is measured by the pressure it applies. Modern constrictors, like the Burmese python, can exert pressure of about 26 pounds per square inch, PSI. That's enough to stop the heart and restrict blood flow to the brain of a small deer in seconds. What about Titanoboa? A 2018 study focused on biomechanics suggested that given its massive weight and musculature, Titanoboa could have generated a constricting pressure of around 400,000 newtons per meter, or, in simpler terms, enough pressure to crush a small car. If Titanoboa wrapped around you, the pressure would be so immense that your lungs would collapse and every bone in your body would be shattered into splinters simultaneously. It wasn't just suffocating you, it was turning you into a pressurized meat patty. The strategy was simple: ambush. Imagine the deep, muddy channels of the Karajan swamps. The water is murky, choked with vegetation. Titanoboa, being an ectotherm, would spend hours, maybe days, lying motionless under the surface. Its patterned skin, which we infer from modern analogs, would have been the perfect camouflage amidst the deep green and brown of the ancient environment. When a potential meal wandered down to the water's edge, perhaps a huge crocodilomorph, a relative of modern crocodiles, or a massive turtle, the strike would have been instantaneous and violent, from zero to absolute chaos in a millisecond. The snake would lunge, secure its massive jaws around the prey's head or torso, and then unleash the crushing power of 50 feet of muscle. So, what exactly does a 2,000-pound snake eat? Not short kings, that's for sure. Titanoboa needed serious calorie density. The Sarajan environment was teeming with what paleontologists call mega-reptiles, giant versions of modern aquatic reptiles, also beneficiaries of the equatorial heat. Primary targets likely included huge turtles like Carbonemys caffrini. Carbonemys was an absolute unit itself, sporting a shell nearly 6 feet in length, large enough to be mistaken for a hot tub. These turtles had powerful reinforced jaws designed for crushing vegetation and smaller prey. But against the constricting power of Titanoboa, Carbonemys was just a slow-moving armored lunchbox. Even more formidable were the giant crocodilomorphs, specifically Acherontosuchus guajirensis. These were massive, semi-aquatic predators, essentially cousins to modern alligators, capable of reaching lengths of 20 feet. In any other environment, Acherontosuchus would be the apex predator. But in the Paleocene swamps, it was often the main course. A 2020 analysis looked at bite marks found on some of the fossilized crocodilomorph ribs in Charajan. While many were attributed to territorial fights between crocodiles, some showed evidence of massive, non-biting force capable of cracking the reinforced bone structure, consistent with the constriction of a colossal predator. The scientific consensus paints a picture of a food chain where Titanoboa sat unquestionably at the top. It didn't fear anything. If it saw a Carbonemys dragging itself out of the swamp, it likely approached with the same casualness a modern python approaches a rat in a barn. The ecosystem was simplified. Giant plants fueled giant herbivores, which were often secondary prey for giant crocodiles. But every single creature was eventually just caloric fuel for the giant nope rope at the peak. It's important to note that when Titanoboa was first discovered, there were immediate wild theories about its behavior, many of which have been modified or discarded through intense scrutiny. Initial thoughts suggested that perhaps Titanoboa was purely terrestrial, slithering through the massive Paleocene forests. This idea quickly failed the physics check. A snake weighing over a ton attempting to traverse land would face immense friction and metabolic cost. It would essentially overheat or collapse under its own weight, especially in 90-degree humidity. The consensus today is that Titanoboa was primarily aquatic, much like the modern anaconda, only leaving the water for basking, to supercharge its metabolism, or to lay eggs. The buoyancy of water was essential for supporting its immense weight. The vertebral structure, while robust, also showed features consistent with aquatic movement, favoring long, smooth curves necessary for stalking prey in murky water, rather than the rapid S-shaped locomotion of terrestrial snakes. Another bizarre, though short-lived theory proposed that Titanoboa might have been able to tackle massive prey like Paleocene ungulates, early, large mammals. This was largely dismissed because the fossil evidence showed mammals were still relatively small in this region at that exact time, 60 to 58 million years ago. Titanoboa's diet was strictly focused on the aquatic megareptiles, abundant in the Karajan environment. It wasn't waiting for a giant rhino relative. It was waiting for a giant turtle. A final point of contention revolves around its exact hunting method. Given the sheer thickness of its jaws, inferred from the size of the skull fragments, which are rare, some researchers, particularly those studying extinct marine reptiles, suggested that perhaps Titanoboa didn't just constrict. Maybe it used its mass to simply pin smaller animals to the mud bottom and drown them, or even swallow them whole without crushing if the prey was small enough, like a large lungfish. However, the sheer size of the vertebrae points overwhelmingly towards a creature optimized for maximum crushing force, confirming constriction as the primary kill method against absolute units like carbonemes. Speaking of evolutionary anomalies, if you're obsessed with the bizarre and want to explore the real-life mysteries of the world, whether it's a modern short-king lizard or an extinct gigantic predator, you need the right tools for discovery. Today's video is brought to you by our fictional sponsor, Paleoaura headlamps. When the sun sets over the ancient swamp, and you're trying to track the movements of a predator that is 50 feet long, you need reliability. Paleoaura headlamps use certified KPG-resistant material and provide 5,000 lumens of light, enough to cut through the steam of a 60-million-year-old jungle. They are perfect for your late-night cryptozoology expeditions, or just finding that dropped car key. Stop searching in the dark. Upgrade your discovery kit. Find the bizarre with Paleoaura. Now, back to why the world of Titanoboa eventually went RIP. Everything that allowed Titanoboa to thrive, the incredible heat, the abundant water, the high metabolism, ultimately led to its demise. The reign of this giant nope rope lasted for about 10 million years, dominating the Paleocene, but it was fundamentally reliant on one thing: heat. As we moved into the Eocene epoch, starting around 56 million years ago, global climate began to undergo subtle but significant changes. While the Eocene was still generally warmer than today, the extreme equatorial heat spikes began to dissipate. The atmospheric carbon dioxide levels slowly decreased and the planet began a long, drawn-out cooling trend. For a snake that requires a constant minimum temperature of 86 degrees Fahrenheit just to function efficiently, even a slight dip in global average temperature spells disaster. Imagine if the average temperature dropped by 5 degrees F. Titanoboa, the absolute unit, suddenly becomes sluggish. Its massive body takes longer to heat up in the morning, meaning less time hunting. It requires more solar energy to digest a massive meal, making it vulnerable for longer periods. Its reproductive cycle, which relies on high ambient temperatures to incubate eggs, becomes less efficient. Simply put, a slightly cooler world is a smaller snake world. As the climate cooled, the massive body size that once gave Titanoboa dominance became a liability. Smaller ectotherms, like slightly more modest constrictors, were more metabolically flexible and could survive on less heat and less massive meals. The extinction of Titanoboa was not a single catastrophic event like the KPG asteroid. It was a slow, inevitable fade caused by shifting isotherms. As the climate zones migrated toward the equator, the massive tropical wetlands that formed the snake's perfect hunting grounds shrank. When the thermal niche disappeared, the giant snake disappeared with it. Ripe Titanoboa. It's often comforting to look at something as bizarre and terrifying as Titanoboa and think, well, at least that's gone. But the lineage that produced the Titanoboa did not vanish entirely. We see its evolutionary echoes in the largest snakes of the modern era, the green anaconda, Eunectes marinus of South America. While the modern anaconda is a mere short king compared to Titanoboa, rarely exceeding 25 feet and 500 pounds, it maintains the same ecological niche, a massive aquatic ambush constrictor that feasts on large prey, benefiting from the heat and buoyancy of the wetland environment. The size difference between Titanoboa and the anaconda perfectly illustrates the dramatic thermal shift the planet has undergone. If the Paleocene environment allowed for a 2,500-pound snake, the modern equatorial environment can only sustain a 500-pound one. We are currently living in a metabolically restrictive environment compared to the heyday of mega reptiles. The discovery of Titanoboa forces us to fundamentally rethink the rules of size and scale in biological history. We often focus on the dino normie crowd, T. Rex, Brachiosaurus. But the extinction of the dinosaurs didn't just clear the stage for mammals. It allowed an entirely new, bizarre form of gigantism to emerge among the reptiles. Titanoboa was a creature born from a planetary fever dream. It was the apex predator that defined the transitional period after the dinosaurs. It was the absolute, undisputed king of the swamp, a 50-foot, 2,500-pound embodiment of pure biological nightmare fuel. Its legacy is a profound reminder that life, given enough heat and enough time, will always push the boundaries of size and terror. Thanks for watching, and until next time, on The Lost World.